To achieve my dream of education, I had to leave everything behind. I worked as a governess before moving.
Marie Curie's most famous work began with a chunk of pitchblende, a mineral that was more radioactive. Contrary to popular belief, radioactivity. Marie and Pierre discovered the elements polonium and radium. Marie Curie's radiation. Throughout World War I, 1914 to 1918, Marie Curie, with the help of her daughter Irene, designed and drove mobile X-ray trucks to aid wounded soldiers. Marie Curie's radiation research was the foundation of the Petite Curie's handheld. Marie Curie's radiation research was the foundation of the Petite Curie's handheld X-ray viewer, which was powered by the truck engine itself. Marie Curie was the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize, shared with her husband Pierre and Henri Becquerel in 1903, and won it again in 1911. She is one of the only people to be awarded the prize twice. When she was 18, Marie Curie worked as a governess to put her sister through medical school in Paris. Her sister, Bronisława, would later support Marie's own education in Paris at the Sorbonne. The birth of her two daughters, Irene and Eve, in 1897 and 1904, did not interrupt Marie Curie's intensive scientific work. Irene would go on to become a scientist and a Nobel laureate herself. Marie met Pierre Curie in spring of 1894. They were married just over a year later on July 25, 1895, and spent the summer on a honeymoon bicycle tour. Shortly before Marie Curie was born, the people of Poland attempted to overthrow their Russian occupiers in a violent revolution. Marie Curie's discovery of radium round pitch. Pierre Curie designed this electrometer himself, measuring refined pitchblende chunks. Pierre Curie designed this electrometer himself.
I then made the hypothesis that the ores uranium and thorium contain in small quantities.
Often, Marie and Pierre would pass entire days and nights working together in their shed. Marie would later describe these times as some of the happiest of her life.
Even though I didn't seek fame, I still managed to acquire it. I was never... After earning my PhD from Yale, I became a mathematics professor at Vassar. When World War II broke out, I joined the Navy, after spending a year convincing them to let me enlist, and graduated at
Hopper's father had both left in the early 20th century, when most young women were told to focus on. Hopper's great-grandfather was a Navy admiral. Starting in 1959, Hopper led the development of Hopper was extremely well. In 20 Hopper's great-grandfather was a Navy admiral who took a dim view of women and cats enlisting. When Hopper became a commissioned officer, she visited his grave to comfort and reassure. Even as a child, Hopper had a curious mind. At 7, while working at the Bureau of Ordnance Computation Project, the machine had to be run around the clock. Sometimes this meant Hopper spent the night. This mechanical tape reader users to program early computers by feeding commands in on long strips of paper tape. This compiler helped translate computer code from a language only machines can understand to something that humans could read. In 1943, Hopper joined an all-female division of
Today, there are nearly 167,000 women in the Navy, almost 40.
When I first got to Gombe in 1960, I had no model to follow. There was nobody out. When I was observing the chimps in the early days with my little notebook and pen or pencil, I used to make little sketches, not only of the chimpanzees actually, but also of the birds and sometimes the flowers, because it brought it back vividly. And sometimes you can describe a posture or a gesture more easily with a little drawing than with words. When I was writing up my notes, I used a storytelling style. Well, I didn't know anything else. I'd written about animals all my life in notebooks. And so it came. I can still look back on those drawings and those early notebooks and feel once again how magical it was to see some of those things. Was it really me? Yes, it was. Louis Leakey, my mentor, finally got money for me to go and start studying chimpanzees in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. The authorities in what was then Tanganyika, a British colony, part of the crumbling British Empire, they refused to give permission. A young girl, straight from England, she stayed in the camp for 4 months, and it was completely amazing. She fitted in really well. She set up a little clinic for the local people, just with simple aspirin and Band-Aid and Epsom salts and so on. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't a nurse, but she established really good relations for me with all the local people. once the Geographic had publicized my research with the chimpanzees in the magazines, there was a cover article, and also in the documentary films, of course, reporters, the media, wanted to interview me. And I was so shy. I mean, I was a person who wanted to spend the rest of my life out in Gombe in the forest with the chimpanzees. And now suddenly I'm sort of center stage and all these people are asking questions and I'm on late night shows. After I'd seen tool using and tool making, the National Geographic decided that they would step in and continue to fund the research when my first 6-month grant ran out. So the Geographic not only decided to support the research, but also to send out a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, whom I subsequently married. And it's his photographs and these photographs and films. When I look back over all the years at Gombe, what are the most important achievements? Well, I still think the most important was helping science to think outside the narrow box where they had designated us as completely different in kind from the rest of the kingdom. And gradually, I was able, because of the chimpanzee's biological closeness to us, help science to rethink its relationship with the rest of the animal kingdom. When we first began our recordings at Gombe, we used pen, pencil, paper, and wrote up the notes every night. I built up a research station and students were doing the same. And then we started to use recorders so that instead of having to write in the field, we could just speak. But of course, lots more was recorded and the work of transcribing a tape took a long time. Then we began to introduce check sheets. And that is much more easy to analyze in a scientific way because you just count up the squares, the minutes on which chimps grooming, for example, who they're grooming, what they're eating, when they're resting, that sort of thing. All the early data from Gombe, from me, from the students, is being digitized now, a lot of hard work, but it will make it much easier to analyze. So we have so much to learn. It's such an exciting time. And in a way, the chimpanzee studies opened the door for science to change the way it thought about our relationship with other animals. I'm now 84, and I'm still traveling 300 days a year around the world. And part of that is to raise awareness about what we're doing to the planet, which is rapidly destroying it. And part of it is to raise funds for our programs in Africa. But what I'm most passionate about is developing our humanitarian and environmental program, Roots and Shoots, which is all about making the world a better place. When I was 18 months old, the first baby chimp to be born in England was named Jubilee after the Jubilee of the King and Queen. And Hamley's, the famous toy shop, made a special edition of toys. And Jubilee was bought for me by my father. And all Mum and Dad's friends said, "You can't give that to a girl, she'll have nightmares." But of course, it was my very, very favorite toy. I took him everywhere. He had a music box in his tummy, and when you squeezed it, it played a lovely tune. And he came everywhere with me, so his fur rubbed off. I still have Jubilee, and he's almost naked. The music box still works perfectly. And every time I look at him when I'm back in England, it just takes me right back to my childhood and the important role Jubilee played in my life. It's important to note that many people think it was Jubilee that decided me on studying chimpanzees. That's not true. Chimpanzees were so exotic back then. Nobody knew anything about them. And it never crossed my mind that I could study chimpanzees. I wanted to study any animal. It just was coincidence that my beloved Jubilee was a chimp. Today, we have a whole new tool understanding some aspect chimpanzee behavior and biology, and that's a very non-invasive way of studying simply by collecting their feces. At Gombe, people follow the chimps, and during the day there'll be a number of fecal deposits, and these are collected. And once we'd collected the feces of all the chimps in the population, for the very first time, we could work out by looking at the DNA that could be determined from the fecal samples who the fathers were. We never knew before. We guessed who was the father of a particular infant, but now this DNA sampling gave us the facts. We can also learn a lot about internal parasites and some diseases like the chimpanzee version of HIV. So there's an awful lot. Throughout a lot of Africa, through the Congo Basin and in Uganda and parts of Tanzania too, hunters use wire snares. And of course this is horribly cruel because an animal gets caught in a snare and there they are, trapped, the noose getting tighter and tighter, restricting blood flow, agonizing. Chimpanzees are not specifically targeted, but so where we're studying chimpanzees in areas where snares are set, our field staff go out into the forest, and when they find a snare, they remove it. In all countries in Africa where chimpanzees live, hunting them, killing them, capturing them is illegal. As it's illegal, we have cooperation from the different governments to confiscate these infants if we find them in markets or at the side of the road. Our sanctuary at Chimpunga, the largest in Africa, has over 160